the Oreshnik, was the response from the Russians, although without a warhead. So it feels like this might be the last warning, though, coming out of Moscow, given how much fury there is there at the moment, and I'm just wondering what is it that you see has happened now, and I guess why?
Yeah, so Russia continues to do um, I call it cautious escalation. Um, the and it started on December 28th with a failed attack on the Vladimir Putin's residence, official residence. And actually, I really believe that the CIA thought Putin would be at that address and that they'd be able to have a realistic shot of killing him. And all of that took place while Trump's meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago. So that was sort of the first blow. And, as you and I, we talked subsequent to that event. The Russians were infuriated by it. I mean, and it seemed a little irrational in the sense that, previous terrorist attacks against the Crocus City Center, or even the, last year, or I guess, no, earlier this year, when Putin flew out to Kursk, and after that was settled, there was reportedly an attempt to shoot down his helicopter. Russia didn't react with the kind of anger that it did in this particular case. And apparently that's because tied up with the attack on Putin was a target that involved a command center tied into Russia's nuclear command structure. And then earlier this year, on June 1st, the United States had helped Ukraine carry out this attack on Russia's strategic air bases. So again, another attack upon Russia's nuclear capability. So I think that the Russians at this point realized, okay, these weren't accidents. This is deliberate, and we're going to respond, but they're going to respond appropriately. So what did they do this time? They took out 50% of the stored natural gas in Ukraine, 50%, and they attacked other key energy substations and centers throughout Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kiev, and so Russia is in the process of literally turning off all the lights and energy in Ukraine as we enter the depths of winter, and it's cold. And they just announced in Kiev that Klitschko is asking people to leave the city, particularly those that live in apartment buildings or condos that are higher than 10 stories, because they've got to shut off the water. Otherwise, the pipes are going to burst, and then you get burst pipes. The entire plumbing system for sewage and potable drinking water disappear. So Russia is being measured in its response. It's not lashing out and hitting NATO bases throughout Europe. I think that would be a Russian last step. This was you sent me an article earlier that I fully agreed with. This was a warning to all of NATO that if you don't think we can reach out and touch you, we can. We prefer not to. But if this escalation, if you continue to escalate this war, we'll have no alternative but to defend ourselves. That's where this is headed.
Well, yeah, I've interviewed a few times this Ukrainian woman, Marta Avrishko, she's quite critical of the far right there in Ukraine, but she was making the point that every time Russia is sending a signal to NATO, a warning, it's always against Ukraine. And it kind of begs the question, though. I, of course, understand why going after directly attack on NATO is, it's a big step, because once that line has been crossed, it's very hard to avoid direct war. And also the position of the United States, whether it will just, sell some weapons to the Europeans and let them burn, or if they will step in, it's unclear, especially if a lot of destruction is inflicted upon Europe. But how far do you think the Russians can be pushed now? Because again, it is a strange thing in the West now. We're not allowed to talk about the Russians, what the Russians are thinking, their security concerns, and the anger over there. But it's really, whenever I hear something from Moscow, get the feeling that their blood is boiling, essentially. That uh, well, they're quite angry with all of Europe, and yeah, especially the Germans. So, how close do you think we might actually be to a war now?
Oh, well, we're closer now than we were a year ago. And um, it wasn't just the failed drone attack on the Putin residence, official residence on the 28th. It was then the capture and boarding of the Russian flag tanker. And it wasn't, as the West tried to portray it, that this tanker just quickly in the last minute flagged itself as Russian and not really being Russian. The Russian foreign ministry came out with just a scorching statement yesterday, condemning this as piracy, condemning this as illegal. What was fascinating is the crew consisted of two Russians, one of whom is the captain, eight Georgians, and 20 Ukrainians. Now think about this. Here you got Russia and Ukraine at war, but you got the Russian captain of a ship with 20 Ukrainian crew. And apparently they weren't fighting each other at sea. But I just learned this morning that the United States has released the two Russians, sent them back. But meanwhile, the eight Georgians and 20 Ukrainians are facing criminal charges in the United States. So you can't make this stuff up. It's bizarre. But the United States is showing they're not thinking this through because they think that they can bully, just as we did in Venezuela. We can go in and flex our military muscle and get away with it without paying a price. One of these days, NATO, the U.S. and/or NATO will cross a line, and Russia will be compelled to strike outside of Ukraine. At this point, they're content to hit the targets inside Ukraine, including any NATO facilities. 2 days ago, 3 days ago, Russia hit facilities in Dnipropetrovsk, in Odessa, and up farther west in Ukraine that were all U.S.-owned factories, U.S.-owned facilities, and Russia attacked and destroyed them. So, I think Russia also is sending a message to Washington. I don't know if they got it, but at least, Russia's not now trying to avoid attacking any targets affiliated with the United States and/or Europe.
Well, the last time we spoke, I mentioned that Zelensky's former advisor, Alexei Arestovich, he made the point that in the bunkers beneath the residence, they do have, or nearby at least, they have the Russians have like nuclear command center, and this was allegedly one of the reasons why the Russians were so angry. They see this as a direct U.S. strike on their retaliatory capabilities. Now, I'm not, again, I don't have any way of verifying whether or not this is correct, but it would fit within a wider pattern. That is the strike of the Engels base, where Russia has its nuclear-armed strategic bombers many times, by the way, one can add. It also is consistent with the attack on Russia's nuclear early warning radars, which is supposed to warn them if there's a nuclear strike coming their way, which is a weird thing to hit because nothing to do with Ukraine, and it also makes the Russians I guess more worried, less preparation time. So they're going to have to hit that button, retaliatory strike button, much faster, less time to consider. And also, of course, as you saw back in June of 2025, the attack on Russia's nuclear bombers, which FSB said MI6 was behind. But
Yeah.
I assume also the CIA had a role in this. So how do you, again, if this attack on Putin's residence fits within all of this, what is the purpose here for the United States? Is it to prepare for a nuclear first strike? Is to signal escalation dominance, that this telling the Russians we can go up this ladder and we can go further than you, so back down? Is it to pressure the Russians to accept some concessions, or is to provoke a response? so the Russians will get further pulled into a direct war with the Europeans. How are you assessing this? Because this is beyond provocative. This is, I mean, when Russia responds, if our leaders dare to say it was unprovoked, this is beyond comprehension. I mean, imagine something like this happened during the Cold War. It would have a separate chapter in the history books.
Well, I put myself back in my sitting back at CIA headquarters in the analytical role that I had. And the question comes down from the seventh floor. Seventh floor is where the director of CIA sat. And they said, okay, the White House wants to know what are the Russians going to do? What is their real intent? Or I reverse it. I'm now doing that position for Vladimir Putin as part of the FSB. And so the first thing I have to assess is, does the United States respect international law and international agreements? And I'd have to say no. There is, under Donald Trump, the United States has abandoned any pretext of recognizing international law, international treaties as valid. Instead, the United States under Trump has now made it very clear that they're going to take what they want, they're going to do what they want, they're going to kill who they want, they'll do whatever they have to do if it serves their interest. So that's the first danger, that now that Russia is saying, okay, if you're Vladimir Putin and you're hearing this, so I can no longer depend upon any promise or anything written. Whatever the United States has agreed to in writing, they no longer respect it. And you've got Trump saying very clearly, not just Trump, Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio. You have the top members of the Trump administration saying basically, your international agreements and your international law, we wipe our ass with that, okay? It means nothing. So from that standpoint then, when you as Russia have been one trying to abide by international conventions and uphold international laws, including agreements to limit production of nuclear weapons. Again, you've got to step back and say, okay, over the course of the last 25 years, George W. Bush has walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty agreement. Donald Trump has walked away, unilaterally abrogated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, and right now has declined our offers to pursue or try to keep New START intact so that we control intercontinental ballistic missiles. So with all of that as background, if I'm Russia, we have to prepare for war. The United States is going, the only thing the United States will understand is force. And, negotiations are a dead end. That's, if I was the analyst, that's what I'd be telling Vladimir Putin. Now it's up to him to figure out what to do.